Hello, I hope you can hear me. My name is Syer, and I am here to talk to you about some work I've been doing, kind of making single-page applications with Spring Security and JavaScript, and I've been using AngularJS in the front end, although a lot of what I'll say today is really about the architecture, more about the actual tool set, the stacks that I'm using. If you have any small little questions that you think I should be able to answer as we go along, just type them into the chat, and I have Rob Winch from Spring Security and my friend Torsten Schmidt, who is an AngularJS expert from Germany. They're on the line, and they can answer your questions in text form. If there's anything really interesting, we can save it till the end, but hopefully we can mop up a lot of small queries as we go along. Okay, so here's the agenda. This is what I will try and cover. A really, really quick introduction to the elements of the stack that I'm going to be talking about: Spring Security, Spring Session, and AngularJS, also Spring Cloud. And the main thing will be to try to focus on what they need to do to be able to communicate with each other so that you can use them in the most efficient way and in the most secure way. So we're going to focus on those features that you need to build single-page applications that are secured in the back end using Spring Security. And a lot of it is going to be to do with, you've heard about microservices, right? So it's going to be about distributed systems and how you would implement security in such a system in particular, when you have single-page applications sitting out on the front of your system for users to interact with. So, as you are probably aware, if you're not, then you can follow the links when we publish the slides at the end. So there's a blog series that I've been working on in spring.io, so spring.io/blog, and you'll find a series of 5 blogs so far that I've been publishing on this topic. We're going to look at a high level at some of the sample apps that I presented in that series, and we're going to use them for exploring the features, basically, of the systems that we're building. So, Spring Security is the first introduction slide. So this is as much as I'm going to say about what Spring Security is, and then we'll see some examples of it being used later on. So Spring Security is, amongst other things, a generic for a servlet-based application. It's a filter, basically. So it's a filter-based solution if you're a servlet application. It is other things to other things. And it covers authentication, which is to say the identity of the user or protagonist who wants to use the system, and authorization, meaning access decisions, rules like, a user can access this resource if he is in the admin role. That kind of rule is implemented. There's a short shout out here also for OAuth 2, because it's a Spring Security module which I actually run myself, and that's also very useful for this kind of system, especially if you're convinced that you need token-based authentication, or if you need single sign-on. Lots of other features in Spring Security, like I said, so go and look at the web page at the bottom if you want to learn more. AngularJS is, I guess, nearly half of the technology I'll be using in the rest of the presentation. It's a JavaScript framework, if you haven't met it before. It's quite popular with the people like me, basically the Java enterprise developers who are a little bit scared of JavaScript, because it does things in a way that I kind of resonates, I think, with the sort of work that I do on the server side. So it does dependency injection, for instance, and it has a sort of MVC style model of approach to web pages. A lot of magic involved, but once you've actually seen a few examples, you can copy paste and be quite confident that it's going to work the way that you expect it to work. So I think that's probably why it's got so much traction in the enterprise. However, nothing about the architecture, as I said, of the apps that I show here requires AngularJS. It's a quite a common choice for people building that kind of system with Java backends with Spring. I should also say all of the Angular JS that I show you will be, because I'm not an expert, will be really basic usage, but I think it's representative. I think you can basically take that and expand it, read the documentation, which is generally very good, and you will get where you need to go if you're a beginner. If you're not, hopefully you recognize what I'm doing. So the next thing I want to point out is that there are already quite a lot of features in your browser that help you with this kind of thing. So if you're writing an application with static resources in a browser, you have these things already. It will give you for free HTTP basic authentication, certificate-based authentication. There are features to support Kerberos. There are cookies, very important shout out for cookies, because that's what I'm going to be using a lot in the apps that I present. You've got CORS, Common Origin Resource Sharing, which is a way to protect applications from accidentally loading code from another site. And you've got the strict transport security, which is a way to force browsers to use the secure socket layer. And then finally, an emerging thing, you've got this thing called the content security policy. Now, the only of these features that I'm going to really concentrate on today is the cookies, but the text here is they're all in the browser, they're reliable and free, and you should use them as much as you can without trying to, build your own solution to the same problems. Okay, so the next part of my stack, which is going to be very important, and if you've read the blog, you can see where it fits into some of the existing apps. Spring Session is a relatively new thing that Rob Winch put out last year, scratching an itch, I think, that we'd all had, so we're very grateful to him. It's not specifically tied to Spring Security, and actually that was sort of part of the review process that we had internally with Spring Session. We decided that it needed to be more general than Spring Security, but it does work well with it. And what you get basically is really easy declarative distributed sessions, and distributed sessions are not something that is not a new concept. It's something that Tomcat and bigger application servers have always supported. It's just with this, it just makes it really easy. And there is a Redis implementation that works out of the box, and a single interface that you have to implement to add other backends. So it's very easy to generalize. So I think the final slide on my stack is about Spring Cloud. So Spring Cloud, in a nutshell, is a toolbox for building microservices and building systems of microservices. And one of the patterns that we implement, or we make it easy to implement, is a gateway or a reverse micro proxy, I like to call it. So basically this is a reverse proxy where you have a lot of control over the internal logic. And that's quite a powerful tool to have in your chest, even if you're not building what you think of as a cloud system. If you're building anything that's distributed, then this reverse micro proxy pattern is actually very useful, and I think I'll show you that today for the security use cases that we're looking at. In addition, if you're interested, look at the links below, and you'll find Spring Cloud covers things like configuration management, service discovery, load balancing, circuit breakers, other things, patterns basically of communication between microservices. Okay, so a slightly weird-looking font on that slide. This is a table with an overview of the blog series that I've been doing. So part 1 through 6. Part 6 hasn't been published yet, but I've been working on it. So we had sort of building up an architecture, building up a system from very simple up to distributed and more complex. So in part 1, it was a very simple single server containing all the resources, static and dynamic, with HTTP basic security, nothing else. Then we went in part 2 and we added a login form, and so there's a bit more HTML in that and a bit more JavaScript. In part 3, we broke the application down into multiple pieces, and so now we have a resource server as well as a UI, and we used Spring Session to tie those together to tie the authentication together. And we used the session ID as an authentication token. So the JavaScript had to actually send the token to the resource server. I'll explain some of these in more detail as we go through. I'm just summarizing at the minute. The part 4 added this gateway proxy pattern at the top of the stack, and I'll show you why that's important with a picture in a minute. Part 5 added or externalized the authentication into a separate server. So we used OAuth 2 to do single sign-on. And then in part 6, what we're going to do is add further UIs, so not just one UI, but multiple different applications all sitting behind the same gateway with granular access rules managed by the individual backend. So that's the high-level plan of what's going to be in the next part of the series. So in pictures, the basic example that we started the series with looked like this. You've got a browser sitting at the top loading resources from an orange backend that has both UI and API resources in it. There's a link on the slide. I had to put a ellipsis in it, but that's basically to github.com/dsyer/Spring Security Angular, and I'll show you the links to everything at the end. So that's part 1. And if I can, actually, I'll stick to the slides and I'll come back and show you the code in the IDE in a minute. The basic building block for that is index.html, right? So there's a static page that is served out of that orange blob up into the browser. It's very simple because I like to have something that fits on the slide. It would have fit on the slide if I left the header out, but there's a head in there as well, which I've omitted just for brevity, which is style sheets basically. So omitting the style sheets, I've got a body in my HTML. I've got and in the body, I've linked it to an Angular application, a module called Hello, which I'll show you the implementation of in a minute. Inside the body, I've got a header, and I've got a div which contains a reference to another Angular thing. So an ng controller is basically a function with some special responsibilities that I'll show you in a minute. And the key to this is this kind of MVC pattern. So this is the controller is called home, and the model contains an object called greeting. And then I'm doing binding into the UI inside that div using greeting.id, greeting.content with these handlebar markup markers. So it's really, I'm told it's not very efficient and you shouldn't build big applications and complex logic this way, but it's so simple that even I can understand it. So we like that because it's easy to see what's going on. When I show you the JavaScript, it'll be even easier. And then I've got 2 scripts to load at the bottom. So one of them is the Angular library itself, and I've mixed it in with some Twitter Bootstrap as well, so that I can do some styles in the same JavaScript. And then I've got my own application code in a separate script, hello.js. And the next slide shows you hello.js. It's completely minimal, not trying to do anything fancy here. It's just to show you, if you haven't seen Angular before, that it's not actually that scary. There's something that anybody can understand here. So I'm declaring a module called hello, and that was what I referred to in my body element in the HTML, containing just one thing, in this case, just one controller called home. And you define a controller using a function, and the function takes arguments which have fancy names, right? So these fancy names beginning with $ are Angular provided services, and this is basically what amounts to dependency injection, and it's dependency injection by name. So there's a thing called scope, which is the variables inside the div here. So the div, which is controlled by the home controller, has variables inside it called greeting, and greeting is here, scope.greeting. So scope is a local namespace, basically, for variables inside my UI. $HTTP is the HTTP service provided by Angular, which I'm using to do a get. And I'm going to get a resource from a path /resource And if that's successful, I take the data from the response and I turn it into a greeting. So I'm getting JSON back from that resource, basically. Why don't we have a look at that in action? I'm going to, you could do this as well. You could clone the project in GitHub, and then it's all using Maven, so you can import into your favorite IDE, which is what I'm doing. So where is it? Sorry, Cloud, Spring Security Angular. That's the name of the GitHub repo. And then there's a basic project there, which I can just import into this workspace and show you how simple it is. It really is just the code that I just showed you. There's an index.html with the stuff I just showed you there. There's the greeting being rendered. There's hello.js, which really is just the code I just showed you. There's a tiny bit of YAML here. I'm actually not sure. Oh, it just says I can set the password for security, right? And then there's a Java application, which I'll show you all of, because I don't think I've got it on the slides. It's a Spring Boot application, so it says @Spring Boot application at the top. And it's an @REST controller because it's providing this resource path, this resource endpoint. So the resource endpoint returns a map, so a map of string to object, which just has the greeting in it. So the greeting has an ID and some contents, which is just fixed. Hello. It always says hello world, but it says it with a different unique identifier every time you load it. And this is basically a feature of all of the samples in the blog series, just so that they're easy to recognize. And then I'm using Spring Boot to run the project as a main. So if I just run that, you didn't see me do that, did you? I did it with my keyboard. I did run as Java. There it is. It's running on port 8080. So I can go into my browser now. And actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do the smart thing, and I'm going to go new incognito window. If you do this at home, do the same thing. All right, and the first thing that happens is I get a prompt for a username and password. So this is what they call HTTP basic authentication. And there's my app saying the ID and saying hello world. I think that's probably enough for the basic sample. Actually, one more thing to show you before I switch off the out of the IDE, just to show you how easy that was. I can almost do this live coding. I just don't have time to type all the HTML because nearly everything, as you will see in a minute, is driven from the dependencies. So I have an XML file, pom.xml, which has Spring Boot starter parent, which makes things a bit easier because then I don't have to define versions here, basically. So I've got security, web, and some testing resources. That's all I need to get a secure application working, which is refreshingly simple. Okay, so that was my basic application. I added HTTP basic security, and I showed you it working. And I added that, like I showed you, using a dependency, a little typo there where I forgot to close the XML properly, but it's just a Spring Boot starter security. And all the starters do is pull in a curated set of transitive dependencies. If you were doing it with Gradle, it would be very similar. Okay, so that was the basic sample. It has on the link between browser and resource there, I've got HTTP basic. Every time I request a resource from the server, the browser sends the same HTTP basic authentication. Let me show you that in action. Oops. That's the one I want. Okay. So there's the network. If I just reload that page, then here are all the requests and responses going, right? So they're nearly all 300 not modified. the most interesting one here is the one to this resource, which is coming back with hello world, which you can see there. The headers include a basic authentication. So the browser knows that that once you've authenticated, once you've typed in that username and password, it can always send that header and you will be authenticated, which is really great, quite useful for getting something started quickly. Okay, but then what a lot of people actually prefer, in terms of users, prefer not to have that funny little browser gray dialog box, but to actually have a form in HTML that they can fill in their credentials in. There's one reason to do that is because they like the look of it. Another is because you can then extend it to do more than just username password. But just sticking for the time being to the username password use case, we can add a login form to that application quite easily. And I did that in the blog, actually in part 2, it should say, part 2 at the bottom of the slide. And to do that, I have to introduce some more Spring security configuration. So far all I've got is what I get out of the box from Spring Boot. And here's a little recipe for how to add Spring security. I create an app configuration class in my application, and I make it extend web security configure adapter, and that's a callback basically from Spring Security. And it tells me I can configure HTTP security. And so the few things I want to do are the HTTP basic that I've been using already. And at the same time, I also want to say, I want to create some access rules. Okay, so I want to authorize requests, and I want to treat the static resources, index.html, etc., differently than anything else. So these ones, the home page basically, and any login and home page resources that I need to load, I'm going to say permit all. So anybody's allowed to look at those, and anything else has to be authenticated. And that just means that I can load a home page and a login page and submit the credentials back to the HTTP basic. Those of you who read the articles when they first came out, I actually didn't use HTTP basic in the first edition. I used form login, which is a different feature in Spring Security. I switched it to HTTP basic because it's the same, as far as the client's concerned, it's the same. It's actually a little bit easier to set up on the JavaScript side because you don't have to convert data to form data from JSON, which is what Angular prefers. So I switched to HTTP basic. Just seemed a bit easier to me to implement, and the result is this. So on the client side, you have, in the HTML, you have a new thing. You have a login form, and in the login form, there's an ng submit. So this says to Angular, go and find, when the user submits this form, go and find me a function called login and execute that function. And so then I have to define the login function, which I do inside my Angular application. And I do that here. So login is a function, and it's $scope.login because this login is inside a controller inside my UI. Okay, so then I define login in terms of another function, a utility function called authenticate, and I've defined that somewhere else. I haven't shown you the definition, but I can show you in the UI in a minute, in the IDE in a minute. So the authenticate function sends HTTP basic credentials and then checks the /user endpoint, which is a new endpoint I just added to the application. So I do use the HTTP basic for the first request there. What Spring Security does in return is sends me back a cookie, and then subsequent requests from the browser to the application code are authenticated by that cookie. So standard Spring Security and browser behavior, they play nicely together. They do each one does what the other one expects, pretty much out of the box. One more thing, okay, before you can use that, you also need to tweak Angular a little bit. Okay, so I said at the beginning, Spring Security and Angular they both have all these nice features. They don't quite speak the same language. You have to just sort of align expectations a little bit. This is one of the things you have to do. In your Angular module, you can, as well as controllers, you can define config, which is global for the whole application. And in my config here, I'm injecting HTTP provider. And in HTTP provider, I can set default headers for all requests. So all requests that come from Angular to any backend, basically using the $HTTP service, are going to have x minus requested with, and then a special value XML HTTP request. So that's basically saying I am Ajax in old-fashioned 1997 language. And that actually is a feature of Spring Security. It used to be a feature of Angular. You didn't have to do this, but they took it out because I don't think many backend frameworks actually understand what this means. Spring Security looks at it and says, oh, you're not just a browser, you're a script inside a browser. So I don't need to, when I send a 401 response, because you're not authenticated, I don't need to send www-authenticate. I'll just send a straight 401, and Angular will then be able to interpret that fine. The browser will then not pop up a dialog with the username and password. I think I probably do have time just to demo that quickly. So I'll keep my basic, because I might use it for another demo in a minute. And I'm going to import another project single from the blog series. This is part 2. So now I've got not just index.html, but I've got 2 fragments as well, home and login.html. Those are treated as templates. So in login.html, it's not a whole HTML page. It's just a div with an error message and a form, username, password. And in the JavaScript, which I'll just show you quickly, I've got some stuff to do with routes, which I haven't described yet. I've got the header, common header, and I've got the authenticate function. Okay, that was the main thing I wanted to show you. So here in the authenticate function, it takes credentials and an optional callback. And if the credentials are there, then it forms them into a basic authentication header. So this is B2A thing. It's just a JavaScript primitive, which you have in your browser, basically. Let me just run it. So the Java application is very similar to the one we've seen already, except it also has this /user endpoint. Somebody pointed out in comments in the blog that this is a very dumb and basic implementation of the user endpoint. If you were doing it for real, you probably wouldn't do it just like this. You would probably return bits of the user, not just the whole user, because you wouldn't want to reveal everything about it. But this is fine to get it started. So let me just run this, and I'll do it explicitly this time instead of using the keyboard. Run as Java application. I'll hope I'm not still running the other one, which I am. Hang on. Okay. Did I get there in time? No, I didn't get there in time. Okay, I'll run this one again. They were going to clash on port 8080, so I have to run one at a time. There it is running up on port 8080. So find my other browser window. I'm not going to use this one. I'm going to do the smart thing. Again, I'm going to use a new incognito window. Okay, so now I've got, I'm not authenticated, so my Angular app is not showing me anything interesting. I have to log in to see my greeting. I'm going to say user password, and I'm going to open up the developer console before I do that. There's my greeting, okay? And if we look at what just happened, there's the call to the user endpoint, and that's basically the one which is authenticating. So when that comes back, it goes in with basic credentials. Actually, it goes in with a cookie. Okay, so you didn't see the authentication call, but the authentication call is just a call to /user. And then there's a call to the resource endpoint, which is the same as the basic example. Okay, so I needed that special header in all the browser requests just to stop the dialog from being popped up by the browser. There's a summary of what's happening there. The browser sends HTTP basic when it first authenticates, and it gets back a cookie in return, and then on subsequent requests, it always sends the cookie. Why is that a good thing? Because that's what browsers do. They always send cookies, and so you don't have to write any code. So my recommendation is to find a way for that to work, basically, and that's what we do with the rest of the samples. Okay, so quick word about cross-site request forgery. Another thing that is very important, obviously, you want to stop it happening. Spring Security and AngularJS both have good support for cross-site request forgery protection. They don't quite do it in the same way, so here's a summary of what they do. Spring Security sends the token. It requires a token to be attached to the session, and for that token to be attached to requests. When the client sends a request, it has to attach a token. Spring Security tells the client about the token in a request attribute by default, named _CSRF. And then from the client in the request, it expects a header called X-CSRF token. Whereas Angular, it likes to accept the cookie, the token value as a cookie. It likes the cookie to be called XSRF, not CSRF. And then when the client sends a header, it should be X-X SRF, not X-C SRF. So they don't quite talk to each other, but we can fix that. So we can add a little bit of configuration to Spring Security to support this Angular naming convention. I prefer to do it that way because I understand less about the client side, so I want the client just to work out of the box. You could go the other way. You could just use Spring Security out of the box and try and adapt Angular to it, but it would involve, that would involve sending rendered content from the server, so it wouldn't really be a static web application anymore. You'd need sort of an endpoint to capture the token value. Anyway, the easiest thing to do, at least in my view, is to make Spring Security just send the right data to Angular. So here in our web security configure adapter, the same things we looked at before. In the configure methods, when we finish doing the other stuff that we did, the authorization, the access rules, then we start configuring CSRF. And one of the CSRF features is you can add a token repository, and this token repository is the same as the default one, but it has a different header name. So that's all taken care of one half of the problem. The other half of the problem, the fact that the Angular expects a cookie, I'm going to do in this case with a custom filter. So I'm going to say to Spring Security, please add a filter after the CSRF filter. Please add this custom filter, CSRF header filter, and that is, the implementation is missing, but that is basically a filter that sends a cookie to the client. If the CSRF token has changed, then it will send a cookie XSRF token, and that's all you need to get it working. I'm working with Rob Winch. Hopefully we can make this a little bit more kind of declarative, a bit more out of the box, in Spring Security 4.0 or in a future release at least anyway. So up to Spring Security 3.2, you could make it work like this. And that's the way that the samples work in the blogs. Okay, so the next thing I did in the blogs was I split the UI into two. So I took the UI static resources and the resource server, the resource endpoint, and put the resource endpoint in a separate server. So this picture that I'm showing you here is the vanilla sample application, which was used in part 3 of the blog series. There are actually 2 apps in part 3. And the first one was vanilla, and it worked like this. It had HTTP basic to the UI, just like the one that we just looked at. That's the login page one. And it also had HTTP basic to the resource server, so it's using the same credentials basically for the backend. And also in part 3, what we did was we introduced Spring Session. So this is a really neat thing you can do, or one really neat thing you can do. So you can scale those applications up. In the previous slide, you could scale those up in a couple of ways. One would be to use a load balancer with sticky sessions. And another one would be to distribute the session data. So we do the distribute the session data bit using Redis and Spring Session. And like I said at the beginning, the Spring Session comes with a very easy way to do this with a single annotation and just a Redis server in the back end. So in this case, what we have is a browser which sends HTTP basic for the first request and then gets a cookie and uses that in subsequent requests to the UI. And then for the resource server, what we did was we turned every request into the resource server. We added a header, which is kind of an authentication token, and the token value was the cookie. This is the same value as the cookie. So we had to make that cookie visible to Angular, and there was some code to write to do that. So the application is now lovely and scalable, but it did have a few little sort of wrinkles in it to do with extracting the cookie value and making it into a token. The fact that Spring Session handles the storage of it and distribution of it means that I can scale everything now perfectly, but there is a little bit of overhead, cognitive and maintenance overhead in the server and the client actually of this application. So that was the basic Spring Session sample. The next thing I did in the blog was in part 4 we introduced the gateway pattern, and the benefit of the gateway pattern you can basically see if I flick between those two slides. So it's the same set of components, the same responsibilities, but the architecture is, oops, sorry, I slipped the wrong way. The architecture is slightly different, so I'm going to flick between them now. Gateway, not gateway, gateway, not gateway. And the difference is with the gateway, all the requests from the browser go through the gateway. That's why it's called a gateway. So you can do that nice thing that we did with the login page application, the single page application at the beginning, in part 2, in fact. You can do HTTP basic for the authentication, then use the cookie from then on, and all the requests go through the gateway. So the gateway just lays that off basically and hands it to the back end, just using exactly the same cookie header basically. So the resource server, as far as he knows, is just getting a cookie from a browser. It just happens to be coming via a reverse proxy. And the way that we implemented this was using Spring Cloud. I think what I'm going to do is, I'll just walk through the examples until I get to a point where I want to jump out and do a demo. I'll come back to that example. Okay, so then in part 5, I took the gateway and the resources basically from exactly the same pattern from part 4, and all we did was we externalized the authentication. So instead of just authenticating with HTTP basic, it was a separate server that did that called the authorization server. It was an OAuth 2 Spring Security OAuth 2 implementation. So you basically have 2 cookies in the browser, one for the auth server, which is kind of an SSO token, so you could use that to log into any number of applications, and we just used one. And then that authentication process would generate a cookie for the gateway, and then the gateway will hand that down to the resource server. It doesn't hand the cookie down to the resource server. You didn't need Spring Session in this one. You could use it for the cookies if you wanted to, but the gateway in this case is passing the OAuth 2 token, down into the resource server. Okay, so this is the one where I might break out and do a demo. So let's, for the sake of argument, let's say we want to play a slightly different game, rearrange things a little bit differently, so that instead of the gateway and the UI being in the same component, let's say we want to break the gateway out into a separate component and leave the back end well, in this picture, it's a single resource, but obviously you could start, as soon as you've got the gateway in place, you can then split up the back end and do it in different ways. So I'm going to show you that basically by, well, I'll make the observation first that this UI plus resource thing in the bottom of the screen here is basically identical to the first application we ever wrote, the basic one. And so if I can just take that basic sample and put a very simple gateway in front of it, I will have achieved my objective. So let's see how I'm going to do that. So how I'm going to do that is I'm going to use, I'm not going to use F12. I'm going to use a new tab. I'm going to use a new tab to go to this initializer application, which some of you might have seen before. This one is a little bit different because it is Spring Cloud aware, so it's actually a Spring Cloud-based initializer, not just a Spring Boot. So here I can add all of the cloudy stuff, cloud patterns, and the one I'm interested in is Zool, because he's the gatekeeper. I don't need to add web because that's included in Zool, but I do want to have security. So there's Zool and security and Redis, and I would add Spring Session if it was here, but it isn't. So I'll generate a project here. It's called gateway.zip. Open that up. So that's just a Maven project in there. Look. So I'll extract that, and then I'll go to my IDE and I'll import it. So let me see. Don't need the single one anymore, but I'm keeping the basic because I actually want to. Actually, what I'll do with basic is I'll copy it. Okay, so I'm making a copy of basic and I'm calling it demo. So I don't mess with the existing basic. I'll just delete basic. Okay, so I've got this new project called demo, and then I'm going to import the gateway from my downloads directory. Okay, so here's my gateway. I'm going to want Spring Session, so I need to add that dependency. I've got my Zool, Redis, security stuff already. I'm just going to add Spring Session. And I want the release version. Okay, so that's that done. And then in my main application, I'm just going to @enable Zool proxy and @enable Redis HTTP. So this is the Spring Cloud thing. Set up a Zool server endpoint, and this is the Spring Session thing. So that's in terms of Java code, that's finished. All I need to do actually is I'm going to rename this file as application YAML, because YAML is easier to work with for this. So I'm going to add user password, so I know how to log in. I'm going to say something about session creation. I think always is enough. Definitely, I could maybe do it with a different one, but I have to switch off the default session creation policy, and then I have to do I have to set up the routes in the proxy basically. So Zool routes. There's a UI, which is HTTP localhost. Let's call it 8081. All right. So yeah, okay. So I think I know I need to do another thing, but that's fine. So I can run this app on port 8080. Okay. So run as Spring Boot app. run as Java application, whatever. I'll do it. I'll take either. All right, so that one's nearly running. And it is running. I can just show you. So it doesn't have anything to, it doesn't have any backends yet, but I can show you what its roots are. So there's an endpoint in there called roots. It has basic authentication out of the box because it's Spring Security, and there's my root. Oh, set up wrong. I knew there was a reason I was going to do that because I've specified this wrong somehow. Tool roots. URL. Thank you. And then restart that. Okay. That's my roots again. All right, fine. So now anything I send to /UI, /UI/star will go to AT81. And of course, there's nothing there at the minute. So if I do it, I should get an error. Yeah, right. Connection refused because there isn't one. Slightly ugly error, but that's what it is. So then to make something appear on port AT81, I'm going to take this existing single page application. I'm going to remove the default password, okay? But I'm going to add a session creation policy and a server port AT81. So that thing's now going to be running there. I'm just going to check one thing quickly. So when it goes to its resource, it's a relative resource, not an absolute one, which is fine because I want it to be relative to the proxy route. Okay, so with this one, I basically just have to add that Spring session thing. So security, so I want Spring session 10 and Spring data data Redis. Okay, so with those two things in my existing UI application, I'm just going to, this is the same one we used before, the basic one, enable Redis HTTP session. And then if I run this app, everybody cross their fingers. So that's running, and it's running with HTTP basic, but with a default security setup, which is a random password. So I don't know what that password is. I won't be able to log into that application, except through the proxy. And let's hope that this is the proxy that's authenticating. Yes. Okay, so what I did there was I authenticated with my password to the proxy, and the proxy passed the request back through to the backend. The proxy, remember, is completely empty. There's no HTML or JavaScript in it. Okay, so that just basically showed you how simple it was to set up a gateway. That's a bit of a trivial gateway, but it shows you, how you can unlock that potential. You can start now adding features to it. And one thing you might do as a first step would be to break apart the back end again, so the UI might live in a separate resource from the API resources, and then you could multiply those. And then finally, we might get to the point where we have a part 6 in the blog, and that will look like this. So I started work on this. There's some code in GitHub already. And the idea behind that was you have a gateway which isn't as dumb or basic as the one I just showed you. It actually has some HTML in it, so it has the login form in it, so you can log in through the gateway. And then it has its really basic navigation. So the navigation tells the user that he has available a UI application, or maybe more than one UI application. So this one has a UI application which is for users in green there, and another one, an admin application, which also has a user interface, which is for admin users, and the admin users are also split between readers and writers. So in part 6, what we get into is some fairly realistic use cases where you have access rules which are quite granular, and the only place that you should know about those granular rules are in the backend components themselves. And so the key to that is, again, Spring Session, sharing an authentication token amongst all the application components. So they all basically share the same user data, and they can see the roles, but they make their own decisions based on the roles. And in a realistic gateway, what you would have here is also a backend database for the user data. So you would probably have like an Active Directory or maybe a relational database, MongoDB, something like that, behind the gateway containing user data. And then that would be shared out through the Redis cache, basically. So that will be part 6. I won't try and show you all of that code today, but that's basically it from today's presentation. There's a bunch of links here. The slides that I've been showing are here in prezos.dsyer.com. You can find a link in there. I will get them on PDF and into SpeakerDeck at some point, but I'm having trouble printing them in a minute, so watch out for those in a couple of days probably. The GitHub repo with all the code is this one, so it's Syer, Spring Security Angular. I may turn that into a bunch of plugins at some point, but at the minute it's just sample code. There is the Spring Security OAuth project there that I run. There's plenty of Spring Cloud actually in cloud.spring.io. I actually think that that URL might be wrong. Should I try clicking on it and see what happens? Oh no, that's fine. That works. Okay, so there's Spring Cloud Netflix. There are other bits of Spring Cloud that you can get to from the root URL there. The Netflix piece is where you get @enable Zool proxy. So that's just the correct dependency to include, basically, if you wanted to do that. I used a starter. I used Spring Cloud Starter, Spring Cloud Starter Zool. Here's the link to the first blog, and from there you can click through to the first 5 that were published. Here's my Twitter handle in case you want to moan at me. If you want to do more than 140 characters moaning, then please send me an email. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Hey, Dave. Sorry about that. I was stuck on mute there for a second.
I thought you might be.
yeah, you got me. Thank you so much. This is great. So, all the follow-up links right there. Fabulous. We're just chasing down the last couple questions here. I think we've pretty much attended to all of them. I think one of the last ones probably is for Rob. The perennial question that I always see whenever security is mentioned, people asking about CAS versus OAuth. But I don't know if that's one you want to take a whack at, but I see that a lot whenever there's a Spring Security related.
Yeah, well, no, CAS is a nice system. CAS is a single sign-on protocol for those who aren't familiar with it. It's quite common in the academic world. It's a nice open source project. We're friendly with the guys who run it. We occasionally try and hire them. And sort of an alternative. It's older than OAuth 2, at least anyway. It isn't a standard. It has a few slightly different features, but if you want to run a single sign-on system, then it's an interesting starting point. It's very heavily integrated with Spring, so it's a nice platform to use with Spring apps as well. It's as far as I know, I haven't looked at it recently, but it used to be there's a little bit more chatter involved between the server components than sort of vanilla OAuth 2, but there are basically the same features, roughly speaking, tokens and trust and single sign-on and that kind of thing.
Got it.
So,
okay. Gotcha.
OAuth 2 seems to be popular in social media and somewhat in the enterprise. CAS.
Oh yeah.
It mainly has a foothold in the academic community.
Interesting. I didn't realize that. Okay. Huh. Interesting. All right. Let's see. Bernard O'Neill asks, for X509, would you use the same process with the gateway for validating the cert and generating a cookie?
I would, yeah, because that's actually something that's quite tricky to configure. You wouldn't want to do it in all of the backend components, unless you do that routinely anyway. But it's a single point of control, isn't it? So yeah, I probably would do it that way.
Ramesh asks, hi, if the request is routed to the UI plus resource through gateway, or UI plus resource, excuse me.
That was a label. That was a label I put on one of the boxes. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Just making sure.
If the request is routed, yeah.
Yep. So if the request is routed to the UI plus resource through gateway, and the gateway sits on port 8080, and the app is running on port 8081, will it be a cross-domain request? Don't we see any issue with this?
Well, I mean, it would be if it came from the browser to port 8081, but it doesn't, right? It goes through the proxy. So the proxy basically means that you control the common origin. It is a common origin. It's all coming through the proxy. So that's a good thing. I didn't mention it actually, except in passing, but common origin resource sharing, it's like I said at the beginning, it's in the browser. You should use the feature, but actually implementing it in the server side is a little bit tricky, and people get it wrong all the time. So it's a good thing if you don't have to do it. That's one reason, one of the main reasons I like this proxy pattern, actually, because it means I don't have that headache. I don't have to worry about whether I've done it right. I don't have to explicitly list all of the API resources, for instance, in my common origin. So I can break up the backends in any way any way I like, and I don't have to change the configuration of the cause filters and the clients.
Cool. Well, I seem to have opened the floodgates for questions. There's a bunch coming in now. Let's see. Eli or Ellie, depending on how he likes to pronounce his name, asks, does Zool support WebSocket proxy? Somebody else asked me this. No, I don't think so, because it's based on the servlet API. This is version 1, all right? So everything in the Netflix stack is under development for version 2, basically. In Zool, version 2 is not tied to servlets, and it's more streaming-based, and I'm pretty sure it will support not just WebSockets, but basically TCP. So we'll end up using that at some point, but it's not ready at the minute. I think it's probably sort of a late 2015 in production 2016 kind of thing. Got it. Okay. And that's from the Netflix side, right? Their own work? Okay. That's their own work. Well, we're pretty heavily involved in some of that stuff now. So, I imagine there will be webinars coming later on this year about some stuff that other people are doing in that stack. But yeah, it's Zool 2 basically. It's sort of breaking the mold in terms of protocol support. Well, not just protocol, but API support. Awesome. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I've been noodling around thinking about that exact same thing, wondering if we should start inviting some of the Netflix folks to present. I think you called it there. Stefan asks, is there a security risk in the use of JavaScript containing the REST endpoints for these projects versus the classic web projects? Well, I can read that again if you like. No, I mean I'm trying to sort of second guess. Maybe Rob has some comments that are more incisive or insightful than mine, but I think the floodgate is open, basically. I mean, the horse is definitely bolted on that one anyway, because these single-page applications are just so ubiquitous because users like them. I don't think you'd be able to put that genie back in the bottle even if you wanted to, but I'm trying to think what would be the problem.
I mean, really, I suppose that's what common origin resource sharing is supposed to address, isn't it? I mean, there are security risks involved in clients accessing, resources that are not completely static. But if you want users to be able to do anything non-trivial, you sort of have to let them do it. It's just a question of how you control the access. So cause is one answer to the question. And the physical locations of the backend resources, of course, don't have to be shared with the clients at all if you're going through a proxy. That's another advantage of having a proxy, not just that. The front end doesn't have to know about the structure of the back end at all. It can all be completely dynamic, which I like, in addition to being secure. So I don't know quite what security. Maybe I didn't think of the security risk that the original question was aimed at, but that seems to be what I can think of at the spur of the moment, at least anyway, unless Rob has something to mention.
No worries. Yeah, I'll let him jump in on the chat if he has something to add.
Thanks.
Let's see. Okay. Bear with me for a second, David. Sorry, I kind of lost my place a little bit there. Okay, here we go. Great. Yeah, Rob's jumping in on that CAS question from earlier. Bernard O'Neill asks, so for X509, would you use the same process with the gateway validating the cert and generating a cookie?
I think you already asked me that question.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I did ask that one. I'm so sorry. I guess I didn't. I still did lose my place. Okay. Had a question on NTLM authentication that Rob handled. Here we go. Praveen Kumar asks, how is the authorization support in microservices using Spring Cloud? Would it be along the lines of a single microservice which takes care of authorization and other microservice hits this authorization service?
That was that picture, right? So you could do it that way, or you could just build all of your authentication into the gateway. Yeah. I think it's up to you. That's the beauty of this pattern, right? Because it's a fully loaded Spring application in the gateway. You can do whatever you want in it.
Yeah, I mean, I think when Praveen says microservices in his question, I assume that means he's thinking about some sort of machine-to-machine headless, kind of app profile, but I don't think that would really change your answer, right? I mean, you might want to.
No, well, I mean, if it's headless, then you can use OAuth2 to get tokens. That's one thing you can do, or you can use, user accounts that represent machines instead of users, and just use normal other normal authentication channels. But generally speaking, in these applications, you've got a user driving all the operations, right? So even if it's offline, a user is responsible for every action that's taken. So you kind of want to associate every request with a user, usually, especially in the single-page applications that I've been talking about.
Excellent. All righty. Alexius, I'm not going to try to say his last name because I think I'm really going to get it wrong. Alexius asks, if we're developing behind a load balancer, for example, NLB, what issues could we expect when using Zool? Any common issues, selling benefits, quote unquote?
I don't know. I mean, I've been using Zool behind a load balancer a lot, right? Because I use it in Cloud Foundry all the time. I haven't seen anything difficult about it yet, but I mean, I know that proxies can mess with HTTP, so you can. I mean, anything nefarious that a proxy could do to screw you up, it probably it probably might at some point. But I don't see anything obvious that would happen as long as the proxy is well behaved and passes all the headers through and that kind of thing. Yeah, I mean, I've used it extensively, and I haven't noticed any problems. That's all I can say.
Got it. Okay.
Proxies, proxies screw with headers, so it could do all sorts of things that might throw a spanner in the works. But I haven't seen any specific examples yet. You can always deal with those things. Well, hopefully you can always deal with those things in Zool because it's highly programmable, right? So if you know what to expect in your proxy, as long as it's not, removing information that you can't get back, then you can probably manipulate things.
Got it. Okay. Oh, interesting. Okay, so Zool is pretty customizable in that way too. Oh, interesting. All right. Let's see. Ali Reza asks, how are we going to integrate Spring Social later into a single page? I presume he means application.
I suppose what he means is, again, going back to the picture that's on the screen now, Spring Social would be calling out to, Facebook or GitHub or something as an old server instead of your own implementation. So fundamentally, I mean, it just changes the way you implement the security in the gateway. It doesn't change very much. It's just a Spring security trick, right, to change the authentication source. And sometimes the only difficult thing really sometimes is just making the user experience acceptable, because users sort of have to choose. If you've got more than one authentication source, how do you get the user to choose which one to use? Some people can't be trusted to choose the right authentication source, for instance, and then you've got a problem. But if you can do it in Spring Security, you can do it in a gateway because it's just a Spring Security application.
Okay, so we're at about 7 after. I think we have time for just a couple more questions, and fortunately, it looks like that's all that remains, which is quite nice. Jeremy Holter asks, hello, the risk regarding security... Wait a minute, hold on. I got to read this again. Oh, boy. Okay. All right. Okay. So he's concerned about the risk of a denial of service attack by somebody analyzing the REST service that was called.
Right.
Do you feel like that's could you comment on that maybe? Risk of that, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, if you open up a resource to the internet, then it's obviously vulnerable to that sort of thing. I mean, I suppose the only thing I would say is that if you have a gateway, a programmable gateway, like we do in the examples I was just showing, then you can do things like rate limiting, and you can deal with some common denial of service vectors just through the gateway itself, which is quite interesting, and it's definitely the way that it gets used in Netflix.
Got it.
I mean, if the browser needs to contact API resources, the browser needs to contact API resources. So, you just have to somehow find a way of dealing with that, don't you? Rate limiting is one of the things that people do. I imagine that there might be some demand for that as a feature of Spring Cloud, in fact. You could implement it really simply, actually, already with Zool, but it's such a common use case that I think that we might add it to Spring Cloud at some point, if there's any demand.
Awesome. Getting feature requests out of webinar attendees. Yay. Love it. Okay. Let's see. Yeah, okay. Alexius, you already had a question, my friend, so hold on, let me make sure I get to the remainder. Oh, wait a minute, sorry. We did answer that. Okay. Weird stuff showing up out of order here. Here we go. Eva? Yeah. Eva asks, Eva Alonco asks, hi, what's the best policy to use access control allow origin header with a Spring app?
I think Rob already posted a link actually into the chat. I noticed that flying by. There's a Spring issue in Jira to do with Spring support for common origin, which is what you're talking about. It's there are many ways to do it. Basically, most people these days just write a filter, and they're quite sort of it's a bit of a blunt instrument. They're quite happy to do things in a very simple way, whereas actually it's a bit more subtle than that. And I think with Rob and Rossen working together, I think you'll see something coming out of Spring, hopefully in Spring 4.2, Spring Security 4 point something. There'll be more granular support for access origin control.
Yes.
Again. So one of the samples that I did in the blog has a filter that does this, but it's very crude, and I put a big health warning on it. Do not use this in production.
Got it. Sorry, yes. And Rob actually did answer that. My apologies. So
yeah.
I think we are at the end here. Okay, we're close. Actually, there's two questions left. Oh, three. But we're just about out of time. Dave, are you okay with maybe 2 more minutes to attend to these last 2 questions?
Sure. Is
that all right? Okay, great. Let's see. So Praveen Kumar again asks, so how is the authorization supported in microservices using Spring Cloud? Would it be along the line? Wait a minute. Yeah. Would it be along the lines? Yeah, I think we had that one.
They seem to be coming up twice, some of these questions.
Yeah, I think people are just trying to pop to the front of the stack, and they're putting them on twice. Okay. Anyway, sorry about that.
Probably just not very responsive. If somebody types a question and they don't see it immediately, they'll probably just type it again.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what's happening. Okay. Abhijit asks, how do you normally deploy the Angular application? Since a normal Angular app would only have static content, do we really need a war?
Yeah, so I don't have a war, right? In my apps, I just have static resources. If I didn't have a gateway, there might be some reasons for keeping dynamic resources around because I need to change the URLs of the backends, things like that. But with a gateway, there really isn't any problem with just deploying static HTML and JavaScript, which is all it was in the samples. Even in production, that's fine.
And you said you were running this on Spring Boot, right, Dave? Am I going nuts?
Yeah. So I could use a war file if I needed it, but I don't really.
Right. Yeah, I remember shortly after Spring Boot came out, I remember seeing a blog post about how to do static resources with Boot. So I know that's not.
Yeah, Roy did one, didn't he?
Yeah. Okay, I think last question then. And the other last question is looks like it's getting handled by Rob or Thorsten. So last question, I think, before we shut it down. Oiku Jen K asks, how would you authenticate with Facebook Twitter-like functionality with auth already implemented in the related Spring Social project? I think we kind of answered this earlier.
Sort of, yeah. I mean, I said I would just put it in the gateway. So in the gateway, you could just link your Facebook or whatever, user resource to the Spring Security context, and then you finish basically. There are already some projects out there that do that integrate the Spring Social stack with the Spring Security filter. And actually, Spring Cloud Security has some features that support that as well out of the box declaratively. But there's just more than one way to do that in the gateway.
All right, folks. Well, listen, thank you so much for the time, the question, the attention, all the questions. Dave, great job. Thanks so much. I know this blog post series has just been super popular lately, so it's fantastic. We are recording this session, and it will be posted to spring.io/video, which is our YouTube channel. or if you subscribe to the Atom feed on Spring.io blog, you should get you'll get a notification when we post this. I'm trying to plug those two URLs into the chat window right now, and it's not working. There we go. Okay. So if you scroll to the bottom of the chat window, you'll see the two links for Spring.io blog and Spring.io video. Recommend, if you want to notice about when what's posted, that you subscribe to the Atom feed for our blog, because then you'll also get all the great content from engineering and Spring One replays, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So lots of good stuff there. Obviously, if you had been subscribed, you would have already seen Dave's blog because it was originally published there. So wonderful. Let's see. I think we'd love to have you come back. Oh, yes. You can also, Alexis just asked, you can get it with Twitter. If you follow us at Spring Central, you can also see, I usually post a tweet when the replay is available. But if you want the absolute guarantee, I would sign up for the blog, because every once in a while I don't tweet about a replay, but that's an exception and not the rule. So great. So speaking of webinars, please join us again if you like this topic. Scott Deeg from our field is going to be hosting another talk. He was so inspired by Dave's blog series that he's actually gonna basically do what Dave did, although with a Polymer front end. So if you're into a different JavaScript front end for your single page application, Polymer might give you that's kind of a latest web framework out of Google, right? So might be interesting to check that out.
I'm going to go to that.
Yeah, totally. I know. I'm kind of curious to see the differences myself. So he's pretty excited about that one as well. So that's on that's on March 24th. Please feel free to join us there. I'm going to plug the URL for the registration into the chat window as well. Should be there towards the bottom. Let's see. Hold on. Let's try it again. Yes, Philippe. We should have a Facebook page. In fact, we do. If you go out on Facebook, you look for Spring Source, you will find a group that was not started by us, but is partially managed by us as well. And then whenever I do post tweets, a link will actually go out to those Facebook pages. So the other webinar that's upcoming on a bit of a different topic, although still Angular and still JavaScript front end, Josh Long and Julian Dubois are going to join up, and they're going to be introducing JHipster, which is a Yeoman generator for AngularJS and on Spring Boot. Very cool little app generator, and that's going to be on March 17th, so next Tuesday. So please do join us for that. I am attempting to find the URL so I can plug it into the window for you. I thought I had it, but I guess it's I'm actually looking at the blog. So the last thing I'll just mention is that generally speaking, if you're looking to get a hold of bits for any sort of Spring project, just realize that we have not enabled HTTP downloads on Spring.io website. It's just a horrible experience for developers. Really much better to use Maven or Gradle, but yet we understand that some of you are on military networks or closed networks or behind 50 layers of proxy servers. And so for that reason, you can get a hold of HTTP downloads for various Spring projects at repo.spring.io. It's certainly not we don't try to make that experience easy, let's say, but they are available. So if you really, really, really need HTTP downloads, we can find them for you. That's where to find them. Let's see. Hang on. Almost got that JHipster URL, which I think is going to be a fun one. I seem to be having some trouble finding it. But anyway, if you look around on the Spring site, you will see that webinar should be next Tuesday for JHipster. Dave, thank you very much. Great talk. A lot of positive feedback in the chat too. A lot of people saying thanks, and great presentation. So I just want to let you know that. And anything you want to say before we kind of close it out and take it home for the day?
No, thank you. That was good fun.
All right. Wonderful. See you next time, everyone. Have a great day. Bye-bye.